Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. My name is Kat Huang. I am a teaching artist here at Art Prof, and I'm joined today by Prof Lieu. Today, we are going to do a portfolio critique, and this portfolio is by Mari Ebisu. And sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. If you're in the chat, let us know how it's pronounced. And if you want to nerd out about art, Art Prof has everything you need, from tutorials to critiques to a community of fellow art nerds. So Clara, do you want to get us started with this portfolio review critique?
Yeah, so Mari right now is a high school senior in Japan, and they are looking at applying to art schools, specifically focusing on design, which is where eventually they would like their career to take them. And we've got a really broad range of materials and formats and images. So let's dig in, Kat. What's your first impression of Mari's work?
I totally agree, Clara. I think that Mari has a great variety in her portfolio. And the thing that strikes me the most about Mari's portfolio is the materiality of things. It really feels like Mari's interested in materials, in the textures and substances, especially when you see things like bookbinding, different kinds of papers, sculpture, even metalwork, which honestly, that's great. I've never seen metalwork in a portfolio, but here we have it in Mari's portfolio.
By the way, if you guys want to read Mari's artist statement, it is in the YouTube video description below if you guys want to get more information about Mari's work. Yeah, I mean, Kat, I don't see a lot of 3D media in a lot of art school portfolios. And when I see it, oftentimes it's not that well done. It makes sense to me because a lot of people, they just don't have the access to the expertise, the training, the materials. I mean, 3D work is just a lot more involved. And if you don't have that tech support, it's really, really hard to do on your own. But Mari has, what, 5 3D pieces? And they're all totally different processes. I mean, we have the clay sculpture, which I'm going to guess was made by modeling. But then there's also this reductive carved sculpture, and we have the book binding, and we have this almost architectural model in the lower left-hand corner, and a lot of exploration in the 2D work as well.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think, again, materials and substances are definitely things that Mari is interested in. And as for the 3D work, oh my gosh, the documentation is fantastic. I love the different photographs of each of the items. But if we take a look at the 2D art side, there are 2 things that I'm missing the most from this portfolio, which I would highly recommend adding. The first being human figures, and the second being space. And I know there's one example of space in this portfolio that we see here, but we'll talk a little bit more in depth about each piece. And I definitely think that Mari should probably add more space and figures in her portfolio.
So Mari is live here with us in the chat. Mari says, thank you, Clara and Kat. I'm excited for the critique. Well, we are so happy to have you live. It's so helpful when the artist is here because we can ask you questions and you can tell us more about the work. Yeah, Kat, it's so funny. I feel like this is almost the bizarro art portfolio because most of the time when I look at art portfolios, there's no 3D work and it's all portraits and figures. Mm-hmm. And most of the time I'm telling people, look, I know you like the human figure, but you got to spread out. I kind of can't believe I'm looking at a portfolio that does not have human figures in it. And so that's something definitely you can tackle. But let me just say, it's a breath of fresh air to see a portfolio that doesn't follow the typical images and formats that I usually see. And it's easy for that to happen to people because people's portfolios are so available and visible online. I mean, when I applied to art school, you had no idea what anybody else was making. And now I think, unfortunately, people are sometimes very heavily influenced by what they see online, sometimes to their detriment. So good for you, Mari, I think, for taking a more unusual approach. Okay, how about this piece?
This seems like the most quote-unquote figurative piece out of everything that we are going to see probably. There's like a hint of a human figure here, but mostly it is an exploration of just botany, I guess, plants, flowers, and leaves. And I think this is a really good addition to your portfolio, Mari, But in the future for your other 2D works, I would also explore colors a little bit more because I feel like everything seems like it's a local color. A local color is basically when something is red, it's red. But if you think about red with a blue light on it, that might turn a little bit purple, right? So I would be a little bit more careful with your colors in your 2D work going forward, Mari.
You can think about how can you get these colors to interact a little bit more. Let's just say, for example, you've got this bluish light in the background. What if some of that blue starts to reflect itself on top of the red? Like to me right now, they're totally separate. This is the blue part, this is the red part, this is the green part. And so finding ways to pull one color into another is really helpful. I'm curious, Mari, did you use photos of flowers for this? I'm going to guess you did. They don't really look like flowers that are painted from life. I would recommend if you can, that would give you a lot more variety because for me, the leaves are really generic. It's sort of the same leaf over and over again. But the thing is, if you look at like a real flower, every leaf is its own personality. And I'd love to bring that out a little bit more.
Right, I agree. I think this sort of depiction of flowers leans just between graphic and realism, and it's in an in-between that's not convincing of either, in my opinion. So I want this to either be, yes, all the leaves are uniform and graphic and it's on purpose, or I want to see the leaves be more natural and lifelike.
Anna Banana says, what if the light actually shines through the leaves to make a yellow tint? I mean, that's a great idea. There's all kinds of things you can do to just pull all of the images closer together in terms of interaction. Mari says, yes, I used a picture as a reference. So sometimes that's unavoidable. You have to do it. But I think what you might try doing is having many photos. Don't just use one photo of a rose. Get 15 different photos and blend them all together. That will make the image, I think, a lot more diverse. Neil has a question about 3D work. I make 3D work, but it's so sloppy compared to my 2D. Do you recommend having sloppy 3D work versus more polished 2D work?
Well, if you were bad at 3D work, then you don't have to include it in your portfolio. I know that every time we have these reviews, we say, oh, you have to have a variety in your portfolio. We want to see that breadth. We want to see all different kinds of things. But if you're truly not confident in a particular medium, don't feel pressured to include it. There are many other ways you can explore arts. So there are different 2D materials you can experiment with. You could try film, you could try printmaking. You don't have to do sculpture if you really don't want to do sculpture, Neil.
So getting back to the piece, I actually think, Kat, this piece would be better if you took the human figure away. I feel that the human figure clutters the space, and maybe that would give Mari a little bit more room to play with the interaction of the flowers.
Right. But I do notice that Mari's title for this piece is growing. So I think that there is a certain narrative here that could be pushed a little further. And I agree, Clara, that the human could be removed. But if the human is removed, that might not be the story Mari wants to tell anymore. So I would just do a lot of thumbnails of these images first. I feel like Mari probably dove right into this piece without making a thumbnail. To see how it would look in the final product. Because right now, I agree, the human figure is distracting and not really lending much to the narrative right now.
Yeah, so Mari, I'm just curious in general, not just for this piece, is thumbnail sketching a habit that you have? Because I know a lot of people, it's not a habit. It's not really a common skill for the average person, especially people in high school. Oftentimes, people just don't know that thumbnail sketches are helpful. So definitely think about that. Kasem is saying maybe a darker background and a brighter light source. I think in general, contrast is an issue for me. I think if you were to put this into Photoshop and make it black and white, the value range would not be very broad. So you probably want to look into getting some like dark areas, really punching up the luminosity of the highlights. That'd probably make it stick out more. Okay, so let's look at these images of this book. So we're looking at the exterior here. These are the individual pages that are done with pen and watercolor. And then this is the front of the book. So what's your take, Kat?
Oh my gosh, the craftsmanship into this book is incredible. And I think you've gotten some really great photographs to show this, Mari. So, especially with the first picture, when you see the binding and you see how neat and how lovingly it's put together, I think it's just an excellent job. Now, that being said, I feel like once I start to read the pages in the book, I think the concept falls a little bit apart for me because it's so lovingly made that I thought the text would be Mari's own thoughts. That's how wonderfully made I thought the book was. But when I read the text, I thought, oh, this seems like just ripped off from a Wikipedia page or something, or just like ripped off from another existing book or something. Now, everything about this is so well crafted that once I read the words, I thought, oh, that's the one thing that falls apart for me. And usually, when something is so strong and there's one point that falls apart, people will focus on that one point, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where the crafting of the book is itself a huge job. And let me tell you guys, with bookbinding, if you don't do an amazing job, it looks really bad. And then if you do a great job, it seems invisible and nobody really understands how much goes into it. So Kat and I definitely see your impeccable craftsmanship. It's really impressive because this is not easy, guys. This takes time, a lot of patience. You got to mess up and fix it. You did a great job with that. But when you think about it, the heart of a lot of books is in the writing. And so I think probably because you are an artist and not just a writer, of course, you're naturally going to think about the visuals. But the thing is, the text itself becomes very important because if we start reading it and we think, oh, this is very generic clinical writing, it doesn't reflect the intimate quality that the images show.
Mhm.
So for
Right.
me, that's the issue, is that the encyclopedia entry approach to the writing, it doesn't fit how lovely the images are.
Right. But that being said, Mari, I think this is a very strong addition to your portfolio. Absolutely include it. We're just sort of harping on the writing and stuff because we have to talk about each piece. And I do want to highlight this is a wonderful project. And maybe in the future you can do something like field notes or a diary or something that is just as lovingly crafted, but with a more muddy twist to the text. So take these points and just move on and learn for your next project.
Shaim says, I just love the way the flowers influence the paragraphs. So I'm going to assume, Shaim, that you're talking about how the text sort of hugs the flowers going up the sides. I like that, but I think you could even do more with that and get a little bit more playful, because mostly what I see is the name of the flower is very large and it's at the top. Doesn't always have to be that way. Maybe you could put the name of the flower in the middle or at the bottom, or maybe some of the words go behind the flowers. I'm just saying that there's a lot more options that you might think about exploring, because people oftentimes gloss over typography when it comes to images.
Yeah, and honestly, typography is one of the biggest strengths of a graphic designer, which is what Mari wants to do, right? Design, graphic design. And it's my enemy. I can never work with text the way I wish I could, right? And that sucks because I'm a comics artist. I should work with text and image. I mean, I try and I'm getting better. But in this case, text and image functioning together is an integral part of this portfolio, especially if you want to be a graphic designer.
Lisa is asking, do graphic designers lay out pages in publications? Mostly, although again, I'm going to say it depends. It depends on the type of book. It depends if it's an author or illustrator, if they're separate. But yeah, I mean, that is definitely the role of a lot of graphic designers. I mean, Kat, I love the cover. This is so subtle and soft, and I love how muted the colors are. It's just so sensitive, the way it's been put together.
Right. I'd also like to say it's mysterious. It invites me to open it up and discover what's inside.
And by the way, for those of you guys who are interested in bookbinding, we do have this Coptic stitch tutorial, which is really fun. Okay, we've got a soft pastel drawing, Kat. It's called Hometown.
Okay. Well, I'm assuming this is a very real place because it's titled Hometown. But that being said, I think this is the weakest piece in the portfolio because I feel like everything is a little muddled and it feels like a thumbnail sketch rather than a final piece. And I think it's kind of clear in the use of the medium that Mari's not very used to soft pastel. I think soft pastel, it's very easy to get muddy. It's very easy to just skimp on the details. And I see all of those faults in this piece.
So Neil is asking if this is done from life. So Mari, maybe you can let us know about that. And Mari says, by the way, this work was my process of doing research about flowers. At the beginning, I was just doing research with the sketches, and this finally turned out to be the book. Yeah, some projects are like that. They just evolve as you work on them. And it's okay for that to be the case. You don't have to have everything planned in advance. But I guess what Kat and I are saying is, hey, you were so good at this. Maybe you should do it again, but plan more in advance what the text is actually going to say, because it's a gorgeous object that you put together. So I would agree with you, Kat. I think it's that the piece doesn't feel very directional, and that I'm not really sure where you're trying to guide us in the piece, because I think in theory, when I look at a landscape, I want to be told as a viewer what's most important. What area do I want to get to right away? What's an area that can kind of fade into the distance? And for me, it's confusing that the mountains in the upper right are more articulate and visible than what's in the foreground. I feel that should be reversed.
I agree. I also feel the way the mountains and the trees in the foreground are rendered very similarly. It makes it feel like a clay diorama rather than an actual living landscape that exists. And I saw a comment earlier, and I've lost it. Oh, by Neil asking, is this done from life? And my guess is that it's not done from life. My guess is that it's from a photograph. Oh, whoops.
Mari says it is done from life.
Dang it.
Well, I think the issue with landscape for a lot of people, it's just so much. It's like the town, the trees, the clouds, the forest, there's all these different things. And so what you have to do as an artist is you have to establish a visual hierarchy. You have to tell the viewer, this part of the landscape is very important. This part is less important, because not everything can be important. If that happens, then we feel very scatterbrained. We feel that we're being pushed in a lot of different directions. So just focus on a particular area. The weakest part for me actually is the buildings. The buildings look almost collaged on, like they don't actually feel like they're in the landscape.
Right. They are treated very differently from the landscape. I think the buildings feel like the point of the soft pastel was sharpened to a tip to draw in each of those individual windows, while the rest of the landscape feels like it was drawn from the side of the pastel, and also more liberal smudging going on as well. So the treatment, I think, makes it feel very divorced from each other.
Well, Ocean says soft pastel is a very hard medium. Yes. Oh my gosh, it's so much harder than people think it is. And if you guys go back and watch, I did this pastel draw along of a landscape, and there was a little house in the background, and I was so excited. And Kat, I totally chickened out and wiped it away at the end. I just like, I can't do this. It looks terrible, because I kept picking at it. So I sympathize. It's not easy to add that architecture in there. But I think just having a little bit more of a plan about what you're trying to focus on, so you're not just wandering around in the middle of the landscape. Okay, how about this one?
I really like the collage of pieces in this page. Now, normally I wouldn't recommend having this sort of process being shown in your portfolio. Your portfolio is to show final work rather than process work, but I actually think the process is integral in this particular piece. And actually tons of graphic designers and designers in general do this, offering different color combinations. Designers love that. And I think it's a great idea that Mari has included all of these different color combinations for these particular objects. So in this piece, I do like the process, and I do like the layout of all the colors and all the objects on the page.
I'm going to disagree and tell you that I think the slide is too cluttered. I think there's a way to show the range of different color schemes without making it feel too busy, because I don't think you should add the text. Most of the time when you're submitting your portfolio, a lot of schools in the US, they use Slide Room. There's like a little text box and you can like put the text in there. I really try to tell people, don't put the text in the slide unless like you really, really have to. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that some of the color schemes for me, they're just so similar that I feel like the two on the bottom lower right, I don't really see a big difference. And so when you have the many versions of the colors, try to make them more visibly different, because to me, they start to feel very repetitive. It's like, okay, well, this is the same, but it's a blue background. This is the same thing, but it happens to be yellow. And I want to feel a broader range of options.
Okay, I agree with your points, Clara. But I do want to highlight that I do love the layout of different color combinations in general. Like some people just think, oh, I can only submit one piece and that's it. I can't submit anything else. But sure, you can submit multiple pieces of different colored backgrounds if you think that's important to the narrative of these images. And according to the text and according to everything we see here visually, these items are very lovingly put together. They're very culturally significant. And I think it's really good to show this in context of different visual components, such as changing up the background color. I think that is good to show. And I do like the text, honestly, when I read it, but I don't think the type matches the text. The type seems to somebody threw this together on Microsoft Word kind of feeling. I think the type really needs to suit the images. And it's really hard to find the right type for images.
It's so much harder. People think, oh, I'll just pick a font. It's hard. It's not the easiest thing. My feeling is that I think it's wonderful that the objects hold a certain meaning for you. If you guys can't read the text, it says, our Japanese table is always full of seasonal blessings. That's so great, because I think for a lot of people in high school, the assumption is, oh, still life, boring. But I guess I better make one. So here's a still life I could care less about, and look at how bored I am. And these objects, they're so lovingly drawn. They're quirky. They have a lot of personality. Like, I love that little, what is it, a sweet potato in the lower right-hand corner? It's got like a little tail. I don't know. It feels like a character.
I agree. Honestly, all of these foods could be vignettes. I feel like I could very easily see these in like a culinary magazine or something that would just like inform viewers, oh, this is a pomegranate. This is a sweet potato. Here's a beautiful illustration that gives this pomegranate character.
Well, people have a bunch of suggestions. Seven Angelic says it looks like a page from a beautiful cookbook. Neil is saying a poster, a tablecloth. And Seven Angelic also says, what if the piece was a collage of all the variations? So you have a lot of options here, Mari, as far as where it could go. But I would just think a little bit more about presentation, because that does matter quite a bit in portfolios.
I do want to pull this comment by Neil back up and say, yeah, a question I did have when I saw these lovingly rendered food items is, where does this live? Is it supposed to be one piece? Is it supposed to be a poster? Or is it supposed to be sort of like a page from a botany book? Or is it a tablecloth? Like, I do want to see these images in action, and they don't seem like they should live in just a painting. They seem like they should live on a product of some sort.
Yeah, like Ocean here is saying, it almost feels like a textile design. So definitely just explore some of those options, because there's a lot of different ways you could do that. Okay, this one's somewhat similar in that it's also produce, and it says Paprika Project Medium Exploration. In this project, I experimented using different mediums to draw my favorite vegetable paprikas. And we've got soft pastel, ballpoint pen, watercolor, and pencil.
I think what made me really enjoy the layout of the previous page was seeing the layout of this page in comparison, because I don't think the layout in this page is particularly strong. It feels like somebody is trying a medium for the first time and just happens to use the same subject for each time. If we had a focus on each of these images. I don't think they're strong enough to include with the rest of your works, Mari, because your other works are so much stronger that this becomes apparent that the mediums aren't really working in your favor here.
Well, I would agree with that. I think that there are parts of the images that I think work. Like I do enjoy the interior of the ballpoint pen image in the upper left-hand corner. Like that seems really beautifully rendered. But I think there's a lot of presentation problems. The first one is if you have images that are on a white sheet of paper, you probably want to make the border like black, because it's like I see the photo in the lower left, it has like wiggly grays and whites in the background. So this is like a photographing artwork issue. But also if you had a black background for the borders, that goes away really quickly. So this is, again, it doesn't seem like it's that hard to do, but creating a slide that looks really good and clean is hard to do for a lot of people. But also, I just feel like these are little studies, which is fine. I mean, little studies are important as far as trying to get practice. But the thing is, they're not really sketches. Like, to me, they don't show brainstorming, but they're not really finished. They're sort of this awkward place. And I know in a lot of portfolios, they do want to see process. So sometimes like a sketchbook page is nice to show. They want to see finished pieces. And these, to me, they're just awkward. They're like not finished, but they're also not sketches.
Right. And I also don't think it helps that these are in contrast of like the amazing 3D work we also see in the portfolio. It's like Mari is showing us where she's weak, where Mari is very strong in other points. This isn't weak. It's just next to this amazing other stuff that the contrast is kind of too different.
Kessam is saying, maybe if the paper is wavy, you can cut out the shapes and put them on a digital background. The better solution is take a good photo. That's what I would recommend, because otherwise you're really compromising what the artwork actually is. And Anushka says, does text need to be present throughout the portfolio? Should it only be in the artist statement? My feeling is if it can be in the artist statement, leave it there. I'm not a big fan of putting text. I mean, you guys can see once you put text on the slide, it's like, oh my God, it's a whole graphic design issue that you have to balance. And oftentimes it's more distracting than not. Okay, how about this one, Kat?
Ooh, I really like that this is in a set of 3. And according to the title, it says a story about me. And I think, oh, this is really interesting conceptual work that is very different from the rest of Mari's portfolio. But I still think that it's got merit to it. I really like seeing this departure in the portfolio, and I think it's a strong departure. I also love how subtle the different whites are in these pieces with the paper collage and with like the paper pulp, I guess. And this is another case of Mari showing us that materiality is her strong suit. Definitely, this is a series exploring the materiality of the ink and the paper.
I mean, I love this piece, Kat. I think especially the image on the left. I don't know if you guys can see, but if you zoom in, you can see like the ripped up sheets of paper, how they're collaged on top of each other. There is some on the other two. I feel like it's a little bit more clear. It could just be the photo. I do see some of that on the one on the far right. But I guess what I like about the one on the far left is that the pulpy paper section, it seems to integrate more smoothly with the ink marks. Like the one on the right, to me, they're very separate. I don't see them really doing much together. The one in the middle, I think, is okay. But I think what we're trying to say is to work on your transitions. Like, how do you get from one place to another?
Right. And definitely, I'd love to see we're always telling people, do more, do a lot, do more, do more. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say here is I'd love to see more on this series, because the more you work with a medium, the more you discover new surprises and new ways to apply the materials together that you probably didn't think of in the beginning when you were just trying things out. So I would love to see an expansion on this series. As it stands now, it is a very good addition to your portfolio. Definitely keep it.
We have some questions. Anushka says, can thumbnail sketches be included in the portfolio? Absolutely. And I do think it's nice with a thumbnail sketch to show it next to maybe the final piece so people can contextualize the thumbnail sketch. Sometimes a little confusing if you're just seeing it without the final piece. And Pressy says, art school admission, as long as you have art, is that good enough? I'm self-taught, so just curious. I would recommend going to our website. We do have an art school portfolio guide where we provide lots of information on what a lot of art schools are looking for. It's a big question.
Sorry, going back to the paper pulp ink piece, I do want to point out this comment from Seven Angelic saying that is their signature, right? And people might be surprised, but a signature can be an important element of a piece, even though you think, oh, it's just like a name, you're just signing it, but it can be like part of your piece. And I think with Mari's signature here, it suddenly gives a very distinct cultural root to it. Suddenly, this is not just some random paper experiment. This has culture to it, is what I'm trying to say, especially with that signature stamp.
Yeah, Mari says, I use Japanese paper, which is like pulpy paper. And you know what I would love to see, Mari? Okay, because we do have this cultural context. A lot of Asian art is on scrolls, very tall, very long, elegant forms. I think these would be beautiful as tall scrolls. So that could be something that you might think about. Okay, so we have this piece, which is model building project. Let me just read to you guys what it says. Building a model of what I would put in the center of a public space. I created this work to tackle with the theme of diversity. This work was intended to be put in the center of a public space. I wanted to create something that could convey the strength of diversity. So we have this page, which is the brainstorming preparation process, and we also have the final model here.
Oh my gosh, the final model photos are so good. Like, everyone look. The last one, I just love that the bright blue background really highlights the shape of the sculpture. And if we go to the next slide, there is a top right image where there's a top view of the sculpture and you see the shadows cast from the sculpture. Now, what's really hard about documenting and working with 3D work is that you have to consider the space it lives in. And I think with these documentation photos, Mari has really shown us all views of this object, and also we can see how light and shadow interacts with this object as well. So this is amazing.
This is, again, another thing, Kat, that I just don't really see people proposing artwork that's supposed to be in a public space. It's extremely rare. So the fact that you're even thinking about this is just wonderful. What I would say in terms of documentation is in this page, I would put like a little person just so we have a sense of scale. Because if you're going to put an artwork in a public space, knowing the scale tremendously affects the way we see it. Like, we don't know if these are 1,000 feet tall or if they're 3 feet tall. So it doesn't have to be like it could just be like a little clay person, or you could just stick like a silhouette of a person into the photo, just so we can understand where it's going in terms of scale. Now, how about oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I completely agree, Clara, on the little person and the scale, all those points. But I was going to say for the behind the scenes photos, I'm kind of torn about this because I really do love to see the behind the scenes photos, but I don't think the layout here is helping you, first of all. And second of all, this is sort of me opening up a lot bigger and difficult conversation, is that the theme diversity seems too vague for a statue like this. Diversity is a word with many meanings. Like, you could say diversity of materials, diversity of color, but when you say something like diversity of people and cultures, suddenly you have to deal with very real, very specific people and cultures. And so I'm not really sure what this statue is addressing. Like, is it addressing diversity of shapes, colors, or is it addressing diversity of cultures, which are just very different and should be treated differently?
I would say in general, when you guys are working with themes, try to get as specific as you can, because diversity, it's like anything could be diversity. I mean, I once had the student at RISD, they were proposing an independent study project, and they said to me, well, I want to do a project about 21st century themes. I was like, what? Like, I have no idea. Why do you just say you want to make a project about life? I mean, it was so huge. And I said, listen, I can't take you on for this project because that's just not focused enough for an independent study project. So we love that you thought about making a public space. The experimentation, the engagement material is wonderful, but you got to get to the heart of, okay, what is this installation really trying to say, and get more specific. I mean, the pieces that we have responded to are the ones where you talk about not just a still life, but the objects at your table at home and how they represent blessings. Like, that's so specific, and it pulls me into your personal narrative. Diversity is just really, really bland as a topic. Kassam says, what I do if the requirements of the portfolio are kind of boring, like they only want realistic stuff like studies, I have trouble making my portfolio interesting.
Well, I think Clara actually touched on this point earlier when we were looking at Mari's fruits and vegetables and food items, is that you might think something is boring, but that's really, you have to put your own spin on it. You have to put your own voice in it. So if you think, oh, still life's so boring, well, think about, how can I set up this still life? How can I light it in a certain way that gives a certain mood? What materials can I use to portray this still life? And you might see the requirements to say realistic still life, but I would encourage you to see that as a box you have to work around and with, and still somehow include that box.
All right, let's take a look at the next piece, which is made out of clay. And Mari, I'm curious what type of clay you use, because clay is not easy. Ceramic clay, you need a kiln. Lots of air dry clay is really crappy. And clay is not easy to work with. So I'm just curious. Okay, what's your first take, Kat?
I think there's something endearing about these little shapes, and I wish I could see more of them, to be honest, because I almost feel a little unsatisfied. I wish I could see this little ball of clay morph into all the possibilities, all the things it could be. But that being said, I really love the documentation photos. I like how it's 1, 2, and then all of them together. But I mean, we're always telling this to students. We're always telling students, do more, do more, more, more. And I guess that's what I'm pushing for in this piece. Like, I wish I could see more.
Well, I like the quirkiness of these. They're playful, they're sort of whimsical and fun, and I do enjoy the simplicity of the forms. I'm going to disagree with you on the photos. I think it's a problem that the background is so similar in color to the color of the clay. What I usually recommend to people is, if you have a fairly darkish colored sculpture, usually a paper white background is better. So that way the silhouette of the sculpture is a little bit more visible. And we have a video on photographing 3D artwork that you guys can take a look at. Also, I think the lighting could be better. It's okay. It's not terrible, but especially the cast shadows that are underneath, they're pretty thin. And I feel like if they were a little bit darker in contrast, if you had stronger lighting, it might just make it pop a little bit more.
I want to pull up this comment by Ocean, which is like a similar thought I had. And now we're just getting into like super artsy discussions, like the emotion. I disagree. I think this works better. Well, anyways, let's just get into the details of this. Ocean says, I think the background color goes well with the mood of the sculptures. And I do agree. Honestly, when I see these photos, I think of fellow teaching artist Lauren Welch, who does white paintings, if anyone knows what that is. It's basically paintings of still lifes that are all composed of white objects, but you'd be really surprised how many colors are in white. There are different colors of white, and to be able to portray that in a still life, in an image, is incredibly difficult. But that being said, this is a documentation photo, but it could count as artistic photography. But I think Mari needs to push it a little bit more. We need to see more sculptures, more concepts, more plays with light and shadow for it to be feeling purposeful. But I agree. I do like the mood of the white background and of the white shapes. I think the subtle whites makes this piece strong.
Mari says it's not ceramic clay. Not sure exactly what it is. Well, it worked for you, so that's fine as long as it's not falling apart. And Trent says, I guess I'm confused why there are 2 spheres. Is the bottom image supposed to be an artwork in itself? I'm going to guess that the artwork is the 4 pieces together. At least that's what the documentation is telling me right now. But what I would play with, Mari, is scale. Because I think the fact that all 4 of the sculptures at the bottom, they're the exact same width and height, it gets quite repetitive. Like, picture if one of those spheres was tiny and maybe one of the shaped sculptures was a lot bigger, then we have more of a different relationship. I think it does get a little bit repetitive after a while, so just watch out for that. Okay, how about the sandstone carving?
Ooh, okay. When I saw this, I was like, I'm not really sure what to say because I love the photography of it and I love how the different the natural light gives it different colored shadows. But I'm like, I'm a big title reader. Every time I see a piece, I'm like, I want to know the title. And then when I saw the title was flowing out, I'm like, I'm so confused. Like, I don't get it. And I really wish there was something to hint me towards why it's named that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to resist looking at the title and questioning it if it doesn't seem to connect in that way.
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's amazing that you have a carved sculpture. Who here in the chat has ever carved a sculpture, like a reductive process? Oh my God, Kat, I took a wood carving class at RISD. I mean, I was like, dude, Michelangelo, I hate you. Like, why did you do that David sculpture when you were 25? Because I could barely get like a cone out of wood carving. It's just really, really hard.
Mm.
And I do really enjoy the compression of the form. Like, do you see the photo in the upper right? It really does feel like something's pressing downwards. So I love that motion. And I'm glad you kept the grittiness. Because a lot of people, when they use sandstone, they want to make it all smooth. And that's fine. But it's like, if you're going to make it all smooth, it's got to be really well done or it looks terrible. And so I don't see a lot of people responding to the natural grittiness of the sandstone. That's refreshing to see.
Right. I agree. But Clara, I think you pointed out another thing I wanted to talk about in that compression feels like the perfect title for this piece. I don't feel like it's flowing out. I feel like I'm being squished in when I see the sculpture. And I think that's testament to how well this sculpture was made, if I'm feeling a certain way. I just don't think the title matches it.
All right, and we do have this balsa wood tutorial, which is somewhat similar, the carving process and also some of the organic forms we looked at earlier. Okay, how about this copper piece?
Oh, wow. Like, this is amazing. I love the documentation photos, of course. I'm going to mention it again, but I particularly love the close-up shot. Just seeing the different colors and the way the metal is being tampered with is just such an exquisite shot. And I think all of these photographs are put together really well as well.
Mari, I'm curious, what is the process you did for making this? I mean, I'm not an expert in jewelry or anything, but it looks like what is it called? You know more about jewelry than I do, Kat. Is it like the hammering where you're just like hitting it over and over again?
Yeah, I mean, I know more than you, but I don't know that much. But
Anyway,
there's something watery about the metal when I look at it, especially up close. It reminds me of like the refractions and reflections of light in a swimming pool when I look at it up close like this.
yeah, I mean, the texture is gorgeous and your craftsmanship is really outstanding. And I love that you're doing copper work. I would definitely check out, we have this copper tooling tutorial. I think you might really like this because copper tooling, the copper that we use is so soft that you can get very dramatic in terms of the shapes. I mean, this is more a traditional bowl that we're looking at here, but I think it's very elegant. And it's great that you have the texture view, but I'm going to disagree, Kat, and say that I wish the photo on the lower right was the big one and that the close-up texture wasn't so gigantic, because I think the dominant picture should document the whole piece. And yeah, show the texture in the close-up, but I don't know, the close-up is so different in the photo that it almost could be mistaken as being something else. So if you just switch up the hierarchy of those two images, so we really understand, okay, that is the full piece, this is a close-up, might just be better in terms of presentation. By the way, if you guys want to be considered for a free portfolio critique here on YouTube, just go to artprof.org. You guys want to click on teaching and learning, Click on Art Critiques. There's a purple button where you guys can submit your artwork to be considered for a critique. And by the way, for those of you guys who have interest in graphic design, I recommend this stream about movie posters by Saul Bass. And we also did this critique by somebody who's applying for a graphic design degree later on. So lots of relevant information there. Art Prof has a podcast. It's available on Spotify and also on iTunes. And in a few minutes, Kat and I will be hanging out in the Art Prof Discord. We will be in the post live streams channel. So you guys can hang out and talk to us about angel food cake that I ate way too much of today. I had 2 slices. It's so bad. It's like so full of buttercream. Anyway.
So sinful.
Subscribe to our channel so you can continue to grow and develop as an artist. And thank you so much to our top Patreon supporters. And the list is growing. Kat, look at the second column. Remember, you guys, when you support Art Prof, you're supporting somebody in the world somewhere who can't afford to pay for an art class and has no access to art education. So please consider supporting Art Prof so we can keep our content 100% free. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.